here. We love doing these sessions. They're truly a pleasure for all of us. This is a free Q&A. This one in particular is all about addressing burnout through your inclusive leadership strategies, through your inclusion strategy. We have a bunch of topics to go through today. And if you had some questions, please be ready to share them. Let me do a quick introduction of myself. Hi, everybody. My name is Natalia. I am someone who's worked in diversity, equity, and inclusion now for about 10 years, really enjoy the topic and enjoy sharing all that we learn with leaders across industries and across companies. We have been doing these Q&A sessions for some time now. We do them monthly. So if you join our community, you can engage in them whenever you like. Just a quick bit about me. I worked within diversity, equity, and inclusion at Facebook and at Teach for America. Of course, Facebook is now Meta, a very different company now than it was before, but working very closely with the chief diversity officer there and others within the diversity, equity, and inclusion teams. And then also at Teach for America, my degrees are in relevant topics. So NYU undergrad studied history and political structures, including critical race theory and whatnot. And then at Wharton for my MBA, studied specifically inclusion in the workplace and majored in organizational effectiveness. So this is my world, just building a little credibility here so that you know who I am if you're new to this space, if you're visiting us for the first time. I also started Scene at Work. We're a diversity, equity, and inclusion consulting firm. We support companies across industries and sizes with all things DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. So you can learn more about us at scenatwork.com. That's my team there. So, happy to see you join the family by engaging in our other options. But that's probably not why you're here. You're probably here to talk about burnout. Let's move into some of the content because today's topic is a hot one. We have been hearing a lot about burnout lately. And we know that burnout is something that really concerns a lot of people and concerns a lot of people, especially now as there's a lot of shifting happening in the talent space and as more and more people are feeling stretched as we come to the end of the year, which is traditionally a really difficult time. But sometimes people raise an eyebrow or two when I say that as a diversity, equity, and inclusion expert or consultant, I am thinking about burnout. They're like, what does burnout have to do with inclusion or diversity or equity? I didn't know that had anything to do with you. So just wanted to put this out there first and share why this is connected and why if you are a DEI practitioner or if you are passionate about creating an inclusive space, this is an important thing to keep in mind. So there are significant inclusion implications associated with burnout. What we know is that burnout can lead to disengagement, dissatisfaction. It can lead to resentment and distrust from the employee side of things. And if you can imagine, as a DEI enthusiast and someone who is really passionate about this, these words up here on this screen associated with burnout are the exact opposite of what you want, particularly as we throw in other major topics like belonging and respect and those senses that we also want to encourage within workplaces whenever we have these conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Someone who is disengaged and dissatisfied and feeling resentment is likely not feeling that they belong in the workplace, right? So that's one of the reasons why we're talking about burnout. Another reason is because it often leads to something that we hear people talk about a lot, which maybe speaks to some other people a little bit more deeply than the feelings part. To some people, the bottom line is what's really resonating here. And that's okay. Whatever works for you in terms of thinking about why burnout is important. The fact is that burnout impacts both of these things. It impacts employee sentiment and it impacts your bottom line. And that's something that it's important for all of us to acknowledge. And in this case, you can see that employee burnout can lead to high attrition. It costs so much money to find that next person to fill that seat. You all know that. It can lead to low productivity. If you're disengaged, you're not interested in coming forward and doing that next big thing or going above and beyond. It also can have a lot of healthcare cost implications. And sometimes we forget about that. But if you are a company that is offering certain benefits, you'll see that likely your employees are taking more advantage of those benefits if they're feeling burnt out, and potentially, hopefully they're doing it to take care of themselves, but they might be also costing the company a little bit more. And so whatever it takes for you to feel inspired to address this topic, there it is. If you are a diversity, equity, and inclusion expert or practitioner who is just like, I'm looking for ways to convince my boss or my manager or those who lead us, I'm looking for ways to convince them that this is an important thing to talk about, I encourage you to use that bottom line argument. Here's the thing though, too. What also happens when people talk about what burnout is that it often gets framed from the perspective of a cup or some sort of vessel that needs filling. And maybe you've heard this before, but when we talk about what is burnout, what are we actually discussing here today? Often people will talk about this kind of like a filling of a cup. This is a metaphor that has become very popular. And when we feel burnt out, it's because we feel depleted, like our cup is empty. And that is often what people describe when they experience burnout. And so it's often what comes to mind for us when we think about burnout. However, this can be a very individualized description of what burnout is. And sometimes that leads a lot of us, a lot of leaders, a lot of companies to think that this is something that an individual needs to manage. So when people feel depleted, a lot of what you find online when you go and search for suggestions and support might be do some yoga, go on a nature walk, say no more, or chat with your friends or delegate. Now, these might be very helpful in most instances, but in other instances, they could actually be detrimental, because what we know from a lot of the research is that it's not just about you as an individual being able to take care of yourself, and it's not just about employees taking it upon themselves to do these things, which are great, healthy practices. There are also many things that a company can do, many things that leaders can do to ensure that people are able to fill their cup. And in fact, that can have the most power. Instead of asking people to go on these nature walks, say no more, or delegate their responsibilities, there is more that can be done. So let's talk about it. Here is what companies can do to help people fill their cup, so to speak, to help people grow their own, grow their ability to feel less burnt out, and to ensure that people aren't checking out, feeling disengaged, feeling that resentment, feeling that distrust, all of those things. So a lot of what we talk about today, as I go through your questions, will likely be related to these three topics. So the first is wellness and employee benefits. The second bucket of potential things to do would fall into inclusive workplace policies. And then the third bucket would be inclusive leadership practices. And what you might know is that when we have these conversations, typically the thing that comes forward for people most is this wellness and employee benefits bucket. So whenever I have these conversations with people and they're trying to figure out what to do, a lot of times companies will and leaders will gravitate toward wellness and employee benefits, which is fine and helpful and part of definitely what you can do to support burnout and to make sure that people feel it less. However, we know that it's not nearly as effective as incorporating all three of these things. Investing in your wellness and wellness related employee benefits can support the individual, but it won't fix the real structural issues or the management experiences that people have. So during our time today, I'm going to want to really lean into these other two topics, these other two areas. So if you have questions for any of these three, or if you came in here with different questions yourself, please go ahead and submit those into the question bank. Now is the time. All right. So I'm opening up the floor now for your questions, and I will be looking out for them as they come through. Okay, great. We have one already. Okay, wonderful. And this is from an anonymous person, so I'm just going to read it out loud and then answer. An executive director at my company seems to doubt that burnout is worse or more common for women or people of color. How do I convince her that this discrepancy is real? Thank you for sharing this one. This is an important way in which there's a very clear alignment between DEI and burnout. We know from anecdotal evidence and also from the research that based on being someone who is underrepresented in a space, there are usually experiences that can cause that person to have to manage a lot more emotionally than others. So there are microaggressions that may be experienced. There are world external implications, external structural issues, structural racism, structural sexism, things that society imposes on us as individuals that can make the depleting of the cup happen more rapidly. The depleting of our reserves happen more rapidly for people who are underrepresented in their spaces. So I think this is a great opportunity for you if you're seeking to help your executive director really understand this. This might be a great opportunity for you to do three things. First, I would suggest you put together some data for this executive director. There's a lot out there related to the emotional toll that is experienced by people who are underrepresented in their spaces. There are a lot of different resources that perhaps will speak to your executive director in a way that you are unable to in this moment. Secondly, I would consider finding ways to help your employees share their experiences. This is cathartic. It's cathartic both for the individual, and it can be really helpful in opening up a part of your culture that your company might not be used to. And so if you're able to open that up for people, allow them to share those experiences in a way that feels authentic and caring, that can help open people's eyes to these conversations. And then thirdly, I would suggest that you work with your teams to find ways to support all employees across these three dimensions. So inclusive leadership practices can play a big role in supporting every individual within your team. However, because people of color and women in some instances, or people within the LGBTQ community, or fill in the blank, all those who are underrepresented within these spaces, because they might be experiencing intense measures of marginalization or whatnot, if a manager is seeking to be more inclusive broadly, it can make a huge difference in the life and experience of that person. So those are the three things that I would suggest you do. And I think your executive director will start to see some of the ways that that's really benefiting your team's culture. Here's the next one. Many employees at the company I work for, including senior leadership, say things like burnout comes with the territory or get used to it. How do you distinguish real urgent burnout from normal high workload? This is great. So it's something that I hear often, people saying this comes with the territory, get used to it, I don't know, grow some backbone or something. So the problem is that there's a distinction between high workload and having a lot to do, and creating a space where where that high workload becomes detrimental to someone's health or to someone's sense of belonging. So for example, there are many workplace cultures that require quite a bit of work, but that inspire and support their employees to feel that they are equipped and able to complete all of that work, and therefore the burnout does not exist, even though they may be working quite a bit. So I'm not going to endorse having hours and hours on end of work, but I can say that there are certain inclusive workplace policies that can support and certain inclusive leadership practices that can support this. So inclusive leadership, inclusive workplace policies that might support this. Having an ability to have a more flexible approach to days off. Maybe you can take personal days or sick days a little bit more easily than in some cultures where no one takes those days off. That is a policy that can allow your people to feel like, okay, I'm going to work hard and push when I need to, but I also know that I have the flexibility to take time off if I also need to do that. And even opening that up can make a huge difference. On the inclusive leadership practices side, as a leader, you can model this idea of, I'm going to put in the time and the energy and the work because I enjoy this work or I think it's important, but I'm also going to take time off when I need it. I'm also going to model setting boundaries for myself and letting the team know that this is okay to do as well. So there are certain things that you can do to help ensure that the employees recognize that this is part of the culture, but it's also not encouraged that people just kind of run themselves into the ground. Okay, I'm going to go on to the next one. Whose job is it to address burnout? In our company, it feels like line managers, HR, and senior leadership are all saying it should be someone else. So nothing ever gets done. Great. So something that I talk to leaders about all the time is, where does diversity, equity, and inclusion live within an organization? Many times people will say, oh, does it belong in HR? Does it belong in, this place or that place? And certainly there is likely to be someone in charge of DEI within your company, but DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, should be something that everyone is invested in. The same is true when we're talking specifically about burnout, which is how we may be able to make your workplace more inclusive in particular. When we're thinking about burnout, maybe there's someone championing this as an important thing to pay attention to. So maybe there's someone within your space who's, like the HR leader, or maybe you do have a chief diversity officer, or maybe even your CEO is saying, we need to make sure that we're helping everyone feel like they're being supported. But largely everyone, your line managers, your HR teams, your senior leadership, everyone should be taking this on as a top priority. And there are ways to do that. There are ways to, for example, one of the big issues we know contributes to burnout is simply not having role clarity. So if an individual employee feels like they don't know what their job is, or they don't know how to do it well, or they don't know what success looks like, that can contribute to a sense of flailing, to a sense of not knowing how to move forward or what's expected of them. And then that can lead to burnout. That is something that can be implemented and integrated. Role clarity is something that can be implemented and integrated across each of those people. Senior leadership, HR, and line managers can play a role in really leaning into that role clarity. So that's what I would say. It's all of their responsibility. Okay, we have a few other questions coming through, which is great. How do I explain to my manager that I'm starting to feel burnt out without them assuming that I'm no longer able to do my job? If you are in that position, I am so sorry. I feel like burnout is not something to take lightly. And so what I would suggest with them, with your manager, is that you let them know that you have every intention of doing your absolute best for the company and for your team. And in order to do your best for your company and for your team, you would like to take some time to take care of yourself. And so I think in framing it that way, where it's has nothing to do with your ability to do your job, you have hopefully demonstrated that you can do the job, but that at the moment there is a lot happening that is making it difficult for you to do it at your fullest. And if it's helpful to share some of the documentation that's out there around how burnout can really be detrimental to our capacity to operate as our full selves, that might also be useful. And if you're able to support your manager in thinking about ways of talking about this topic and able to let them know that you're experiencing this and here's what I would benefit from if you were able to share that with me, I would benefit from these things so that I can continue to be my absolute best self. That I think is really helpful because there are things that managers can do. It's part of this inclusive leadership practices bucket. There are things that they can do to support you and make you feel like you're able to move forward effectively. And so if you have that kind of relationship with your manager and feel like you can share those things, I would definitely have that conversation with them. Let's see what other questions we have here. Okay. How can I address burnout with those I manage if I don't have any real decision-making power, like giving people a better time off policy? Okay, so this is where I think the distinction exists between the inclusive workplace policies and the inclusive leadership practices. You as a leader who dictates the culture within your team, you can still influence a sense that you care about them and that you're interested in supporting them, even without these policies. So how do you do that? You can set up time within one-on-one conversations to check in on the more personal side of things, on how people are actually doing, on how they're emotionally being impacted by their workload. And you can make that a standard part of your one-on-one conversation where you genuinely and truly invite those conversations and ask for that kind of feedback and let them know that you're here to support. That's one thing I would do. Secondly, I would certainly model, like I mentioned before, model taking the time necessary for yourself and setting certain boundaries for yourself. You can also, if they're feeling overworked, work with your team member to delegate together so that they feel that they're being supported. So delegating their work tasks to other people, working with them to understand what's top priority for their work in that particular role. We talked about role clarity being huge. Role clarity is something that comes into play with burnout quite a bit. It's one of the top reasons we see people struggling with burnout because they are not aware of what exactly they should be doing. So if you are able to share, here are the things that are most a top priority. Here are the things that you should be working on primarily right now. Here are the things you don't need to worry about. That can go a long way. And then also, I would encourage you to consider creating spaces for your team to talk to each other about their strategies for supporting each other. Apologies, I thought I turned off my notifications. So what strategies might they have for supporting themselves and each other when it comes to burnout? Some of those strategies that I shared earlier, like yoga, chatting with friends, meditation, if you create a culture where people talk about that together with each other on your team, that can also go a long way. And then lastly, I think it's important for your team members to feel like they know all of the options afforded to them on the well-being employee benefits side. So being very clear with your team about the different policies that do exist, the different benefits that do exist, what they can engage in, and then again, modeling that for them so that they know. Okay, wonderful. Let's go to the next question. Ooh, and we're getting quite a few. Okay. What signs of burnout should I be watching for on my team? Are there specific things I should be looking for related to an employee's race, gender identity, or other trait? Okay, So there's a couple of things in this question that are helpful. So what should you be looking out for while looking at your team? Firstly, what we know is that there's often a pulling back that might happen when people are feeling burnt out. So a sense that someone is not fully themselves in certain spaces. So maybe in a team meeting or in a one-on-one conversation, if you're noticing that maybe someone is feeling like they might be not disengaged, but less engaged than usual, having those conversations quickly and early and seeing what you can do as a manager to support them is important. You might also feel that the culture itself around work or around projects and deliverables might be feeling some tension. Maybe there's a sense that like, well, we don't know if we can do that, or we're feeling there's just like a tension in the air that might be coming forward. If you're sensing that, that's the time to air it out in a team setting. See, okay, I get the sense that there's a lot happening. What can we do together to sort this out? Or I got the sense that this is happening. So I sat down and thought through how we could manage our tasks effectively. When I'm working with leaders, there's often an opportunity to coach around vulnerability and sharing experiences that you've had where maybe you were impacted by burnout or by feeling this stretch and tension. And I think that can also be something that's really helpful at this time. So if you're not sure, if you don't know if people are feeling less engaged, or if you don't know if people are feeling stretched, there is a possibility that there's an opportunity to create a culture around that within your organization. And if that's the case, you can start creating that culture by sharing some stories that you yourself have experienced related to burnout, what you've done to support yourself, but also really sitting in some of that discomfort and sharing the ways that you may have struggled here or there and how much you understand those moments so that others can feel like they can reach out to you. Hopefully that's helpful. The second part of your question was related to employees related to identity. So their gender identity, their race, or another trait. I would suggest that you do what I just described, this whole setting things up appropriately for your team, for the whole team, but then ensure that you're acknowledging to your team that you understand that being someone who is underrepresented in any space can have an additional toll, and that you're open to having those conversations with people if they want to share how something like their racial identity or gender identity or other identity is impacting their experience. I wouldn't suggest that you go single anyone out unless something really pressing is happening in the world, in which case it would make sense for you to make sure that they know that you're there for them. But otherwise, I would really encourage a space of psychological safety broadly. Okay, I spoke a lot on that question. I'm going to try to move us on. Let's see. Can you explain more the intersectional nature of burnout and other identities? Oh, this is a very interesting, this is a topic of interest for people, and how I can support those that have more factors working against them. Yes. So this seems like it's a topic that people are really thinking about. So we know that there are many instances within workplaces, many systems, many moments that compound to create potentially a sense of isolation or exclusion, particularly for those who are underrepresented. So we know that there are things that may be said or things that may be done, or even in terms of the nature of the systems within our organizations that can provide a sense of alienation or isolation, more so for those who are underrepresented than for those who are overrepresented or represented in an effective manner within an organization. So with that in mind, we know that burnout and the emotional trauma and toll of all of that can be more especially felt by those who are underrepresented in those spaces. We also know that those who have identities that are invisible can also experience burnout in a different way because it's just not addressed. So whether we're talking about disabilities or whether we're talking about caregiving at home, which is something that you might not know is happening for this person. Maybe we're talking about socioeconomic status, socioeconomic identity, and contributing to their home in a way that causes some financial stress. All of those factors come together to influence the sense of depletion that might be experienced by your employees, specifically when we're talking about employees who are underrepresented and therefore not as highly acknowledged and highly visible within a workplace. So in order to support those individuals, there are a few different things that are kind of important across the board that are fairly baseline. There's this, I wish I actually shouldn't bring it up if I don't remember the name of the gentleman who did this research. But there's some research around the hygiene of a workplace culture. And the term hygiene is used to describe the baseline level of support that is offered by an organization. And then there's also additional layers that can be offered to better to support everyone. And so we, as leaders, we want to be sure that we're doing the baseline for everyone. And in doing the baseline for everyone, we're really creating a foundation for those who may need additional support and our additional attention. So some of that baseline includes, if you have the ability to influence this, a good salary for your employees, one that actually supports them in the space that they're living for their cost of living, effective health benefits, so they're not worrying about their health benefits, awareness of their job, their role, what they're required to do, right? All of those things are this baseline. When we're talking about also supporting our underrepresented colleagues, we want to think about ways of creating not just a psychologically safe environment where everyone can share things, which is baseline, but also creating spaces for storytelling where people can share their experiences on a very intimate and personal level, that you create a safe space for that, for those who are interested, not for everyone, not pushing that. You'll want to make sure that you're creating an opportunity for people to feel like they can come to you with those kinds of concerns. So sometimes those of us who are underrepresented in spaces don't feel like we can share that something happened because we don't know that we will be understood or listened to. And so creating an environment where people know that that will be encouraged and listened to and paid attention to. So creating a track record of believing people when they share something. Also encouraging allyship in every context of that word, right? Encouraging a space where people, even if they themselves are not identifying as underrepresented, they're supporting others who are. There are a few different things that you can do, but I want to also create that dichotomy where you're thinking about the baseline for everyone and then also thinking about how you can support people with that baseline being really important. Okay, is there a quick solution in giving a raise or bonus to an employee that I notice is feeling burnt out, or is that not helpful? So bonuses used to be the way that people really responded to burnout. Bonuses and raising salaries over time or immediately, that can have a short-term effect. It can have the short-term effect of making the employee feel valued, making the employee feel like you're paying attention to them, you noticed them. But what we know is that raising salaries to a point, raising salaries and offering bonuses is only a short-term solution. It's not a longer-term solution. So if your company structure is one that does not allow for people to understand how they can be promoted or move forward generally, then maybe people will feel burnt out or confused based off of that. If you're noticing some people are feeling burnout and giving them promotions, giving them salary and support, but maybe others are better at hiding those feelings and they kind of start to feel any type of way about the, you want to be very careful about leaning too heavily on that as a solution for yourself, because there are only short-term benefits and there are some drawbacks to that approach. We know that equitable practices around promotions, around bonuses, around increases in salary go a long way to making people feel like they know where they're going, especially if you're transparent about those equitable practices. So if you're transparent about how you're thinking about these kinds of incentives, if you're transparent about what people need to do in order to get there, that's great. So quick solution, I wouldn't call it that. The best quick solution I would suggest is maybe not so quick, but you can do it right away. I would suggest that you sit down with your team and let them know that you care deeply about their well-being and that you are here to support them with whatever they need to be as effective in their roles as possible. And so if you haven't had that conversation with your team yet, and you're kind of just, noticing that some people are struggling, I would encourage you to have that conversation with your team and then be ready to listen. Be ready for any feedback. If you're going to open the floodgates on that, they might have some words for you. And hopefully it'll all come out for the better. Great. Thank you very much for that. Let's move on to the next question. How do I ask underrepresented employees to tell me more about their experience with burnout without making it just one more thing for them to do? I feel like this could easily slip into being the don't ask your Black ERG to be your DEI saviors phenomenon. Okay, so this question is one that comes up a lot because, as you may know, there is emotional labor involved in having to talk about how you're feeling or talk about how you're feeling in the context of already so much coming at you. So fair question. This is why the dichotomy I shared earlier related to the workplace hygiene, having the basics taken care of for your people is really important, and incorporating in those basics, not just something like salary and, fine benefits, but also incorporating in your conception of that hygiene, you're leaning into inclusive leadership practices. So your attempt at making sure that people are understanding of their roles, understand how they can move and progress, your attempt at ensuring that people feel like they can share when they have concerns, or they can share if they've experienced microaggression or witnessed one rather. And that's something that can be really important, because when you are in the midst of witnessing, or if there are moments where perhaps someone is experiencing or witnessing a microaggression and they're able to talk about it, it can go a long way to ensuring that the space feels more safe for everyone. So I think I touched on this a little earlier, but I wouldn't go and, say, hey, I know you're a Black person, so you must be really feeling intense feelings right now. What can I do for you specifically as Black? I would not do that. I would recognize that this is something that impacts people differently based on their identity. And in order to really help ensure that people feel like they're seen for who they are holistically, you can say, I recognize that different identities, especially those that are underrepresented in this room, in this space, in this organization, may have an additional toll put on them. I want to hear from you what's happening, so please know that I'm open to it. And so creating that space where people know that you're willing to have that conversation is better than going out and having targeted conversations where you might be asking people to do some emotional labor or to engage in emotional labor that might be really difficult in the moment. Last thing I'll say about this is the importance of developing allies across all dimensions, because we know that that can help make people feel like they don't have to do as much of the work, and like this is something that everyone is invested in. Great. I'm going to move on to the next question. Okay. Is there anything different that we can do to address burnout that might be mixed from both work overload, but also things happening in society and in life that might also be overwhelming and contributing to burnout? I don't want to pry, but if they're overloaded from stressors that aren't work related, I'm worried that I won't be helpful. If you remember, last year with everything happening around the Black Lives Matter movement, many people turned to each other to learn about everything that was happening around Black Lives Matter, but also it wasn't just people coming together to learn more. It was also many spaces becoming open for people of color to commune and share their feelings with each other in safe spaces together with each other in those realms. We also saw that happen in other instances with what was happening around the Stop Asian Hate movement. We did see many Asian communities come together and have conversations about this with each other. And many workplaces don't create those spaces for their employees in a way that can be helpful. And so this, I think, is an opportunity to consider leaning into investing in those spaces. If you don't already have employee resource groups or affinity groups, creating those groups, endorsing and investing in those groups, of course, you'll want them to have to be open to allies as well as to those who identify with that particular identity. But having these spaces for people to come together can be really powerful. And so what you can do if you're someone's manager is support that in someone's experience by creating a space where that can happen, where people can come together and share with amongst themselves and with others as they feel comfortable. I also think there's a lot to be said about educating yourself around the topics or whatever is happening out in the world. It's powerful if you aren't relying on someone from within a community to educate you on what's happening in that community. So you can learn a whole lot by creating that for yourself and by learning for yourself and not necessarily leaning too much on that. Okay, we have another question here. I'm a man and I manage a mixed gender team. I'm getting the sense that the women on my team are experiencing serious burnout, but none of them have explicitly brought it up to me as of now. Is it appropriate for me to assume or ask if it's about gender? I want to be inclusive and cognizant of how gender impacts the work experiences, but I'm worried about overstepping here. Yeah, I appreciate you asking this question. Thank you for doing so. I certainly think we shouldn't make assumptions about what might be causing or what might be influencing the ways that burnout is experienced on our teams. There could be some gender implications. Also, we don't know. There are many instances when people are burnt out and really struggling, but are not sharing it or showing it in a way that is discernible. So it's possible the women on your team are experiencing burnout, although it's also possible that there is a sense throughout the team that there's burnout. And so rather than make any assumptions about why it might be happening or who is more susceptible to it in this moment, I would start looking at the ways that you can create that baseline hygiene, unless you think it's all the way there, in which case maybe there are other things that you can do on this other side. But I do think that often we'll find that something like flexible schedules or allowing people to feel that they can take time when needed can get in the way and can can create a sense of burnout. Often creating a space where people are hiding their feelings and are not able to share can get in the way of burnout, because it takes time, energy, and effort to hide your true feelings, right? And so there are some people, again, who do that very well and have, no problem doing it until maybe a later moment when things snap. But if you're creating a space where people feel like they can safely share with you what's happening, then everyone benefits. And you can do that by ensuring that you're setting up time with everyone one-on-one or during a team meeting to really check in on them personally. You can have that be something that you integrate into your leadership practice on a regular basis and see if that helps in ensuring that people share with you how they're actually feeling. And you might be surprised that one or two of the people that you didn't know was struggling might be. And then also really thinking about how you're modeling certain things for people. So, are you modeling those moments when you really want to take, a piece of your morning off because you need to go for a walk or something like that? I don't know what your experience is, but often as leaders, we'll hide some of those things because maybe we don't think that it will seem leader-like to take any time off or to seem like we're not as dedicated to the work. But that can go a whole long way to ensuring that people feel supported and like they can come to you if they need that time off as well. So I would really start with this kind of flat line approach to this work first. You could be right about there being something there between the groups that you've identified within your employee base, but you also could be wrong. And rather than make some assumptions about this, the best way to start would be to create a space where people are willing to share with you. And if they bring it up, that maybe there's a culture within your workplace that seems additionally burdensome to women, then that could be really difficult, or that could be something that's really important to address because it could be really difficult for them. I also would maybe do some things behind the scenes to make sure that your workplace systems are effective for all people. Maybe do a pay equity audit or something like that. Maybe ensuring that there are no, that people are able to talk about microaggressions if they come forward. So if you notice moments where we know that gender, often something that happens is that women may be spoken over, or maybe a suggestion of theirs may be taken and someone else gets credit. Or sometimes we delegate in our workplaces tasks that are more minute, more related to caretaking of the office. Those are more likely to be delegated to a woman, like setting up the next company happy hour or setting up the next birthday party. And of course, those are all subtle ways that we may be reinforcing this power dynamic and adding more stress to some people within the workplace. So rather than go ahead and kind of act on certain assumptions, do a little bit of an audit to see if there are any ways that the organization might be reinforcing some of these things through its systems and processes. Oh man, we are just about out of time. We have 10 more minutes. There are a couple more questions here, but I do want to close us out. So let me close us out and see if I can come back to these questions to answer them. Again, we do these sessions monthly. We like to offer free resources to everyone based on these topics that we spend all of our time reading and learning about, because we know that they can be helpful to people. If you want to work with us directly, please feel free to. You can reach us at cnetwork.com/consultation. You can set up time to meet with us. You can also find us on all the social media. We're all over the place on Twitter, on Instagram, on YouTube, on LinkedIn. And then we also have a newsletter. So if you want, you can sign up for that newsletter. And if you indicated that you were okay with us sending you items, we probably will be putting you on the newsletter. So I hope we find you there. Additionally, we have some courses that you can lean into. Please check them out at courses.cnetwork.com. You can go through these on your own. A couple of them are listed here. ERGs, employee resource groups, and reducing bias in recruiting and hiring. And also, we have our next one coming up in December, on December 14th from 12 to 1. So we encourage you to engage in that one, which hopefully sounds like an interesting time. I think that's it. Unless anyone has any last minute questions, I will stay online for the next 7 minutes and answer any last minute questions that may come forward. Thank you so much for being here. I hope this was helpful. Burnout is a topic that is always so important and tricky. So it's great that you all came here to show your passion and interest. So thank you very much.